All right, welcome to the studio, Tracy Mika. She's the executive producer, Rural Delivery on Television 1. I was going to use its old name, the branding department, TVNZ1 it's called now. We've got Jamie Mackay, country on News Talk ZB. The boot's on the other foot today, Jamie, and I get to ask you all of the pressing questions. And he's in Christchurch, and Sally Ray, award-winning business and rural editor of the excellent Otago Daily Times down there in Dunedin. And we're discussing the need for a dedicated rural media, what's its relevance, and what recent and constant changes in the local media landscape mean for effective rural reporting. I am going to start with you, Tracy. Where do we stand at the moment? Is the state of rural media in ruddy good health, or is there a little bit of problem?
I can't speak for everybody else, but we definitely struggle every year to make sure that rural delivery stays on air. And I mean, all the stories that we're telling are stories that might not otherwise be told because they're not on the general media. But, you know, there's amazing stuff that's happening out there, and we feel really lucky and privileged to have rural delivery on air to show those stories.
Marvellous. Sally, you're down there, proudly independent ODT, the sort of the bulwark of the newspaper industry. How is it for you down there in this particular rural sector, the rural beat?
I think we're pretty lucky. We're extremely lucky to still be privately owned, and we're pretty proud of that. And I am extremely grateful, I guess, that Allied Press still puts a considerable amount of importance. We all know how important the rural sector is to our economy. The newspaper also sees that importance. The unfortunate thing is we've seen so many other mainstream media, I guess, for want of a better word, just walk away from rural coverage. Not that long ago that every major paper had a rural editor, dedicated rural coverage. That's all gone. We're still here. We're still strongly rural. Regular weekly farm pages through the week, the business page, and we've also got 2 dedicated rural community papers out serving from Canterbury to Southland. So we are in a pretty good space.
And I suspect in some ways that's, by dint of that location, most of your readers down there are more rural than they are urban.
Yes, of course, yes.
Yeah. And Jamie, of course, in the radio landscape, we've got, the rural shock jocks such as yourself looking for your listeners to tune in. How's the radio space for the rural sector?
Oh, I don't think it's too bad, to be honest, Radar. I think we're reasonably well served. Obviously, Rowena, myself and Lashes do a daily show. We've now got a country sport breakfast starting on our new Gold AM frequency, our opposition at Media Works.
I expect you to be putting in some shameless promotional plugs.
No, I'm giving a promotional plug for the opposition here, Radar.
Yeah.
Give me a break. So this is Lowie and Hamish Mackay are doing it on the opposition channel. RNZ certainly has a reasonable rural bent, although some might argue theirs is more aimed at lifestylers. And we've got the likes of Sarah Perriam, who's doing her bit as well on some smaller radio stations, but also streaming live. So, and I pick up on Sally's point, in the good old days, every provincial paper, Southland Times, I grew up in Southland, had a rural editor. They don't anymore. Sally's one of a rare breed. So I think radio's probably holding its end up pretty well compared to some other forms of the media.
It is. Are we seeing, Tracy, a change in the way that people are now able to deliver things? Jamie mentioned Sarah's show, and we've seen, perhaps not in the rural sector, but the likes of Spin-Off, I Tangata newsrooms, different ways of presenting things. Will that continue on in the near future? Is that a...
Well, I definitely think it will. The landscape is changing. We talked just before about how people used to tune in at 7 a.m. to watch our program, but now you can literally watch it anytime you like. It's on TVNZ on demand, and then it's on our website or on our YouTube channel. People can watch things in lots of different ways now, and I think when we apply for funding, it's all about the eyeballs, and that's where it seems to be at, is where you can find those eyeballs.
And you seem to have no trouble, Jamie, finding eyeballs. Often, I think the other day when we spoke on Monday, and an interview that you had on The Country, ostensibly a rural show, was one of the leading stories on the Herald and various other sites. So you are, there on a rural program driving mainstream news.
Oh, well, on occasions we managed to hit a note with that one, but to be fair, this is for me and for this show been a 25-year battle. Would be fair to say that in the initial stages, because I started out in small rural radio in Gore. I know you know the town well, Radar, as does Sally, and we were just a small operation, privately run, and we were doing quite well. And I thought if we could magnify that by 25 or 26 markets around the country, we'd have a good, profitable proposition. And it's been quite a battle to get it there. But I know that Sally was talking about who's reading her stuff, mainly rural folk. Well, I can tell you now that on our show, for instance, we have more urban listeners than rural listeners, and that's just by way of population.
Sally, has there been a change in the content or the how you produce things? You know, you used to be able to sort of write a newspaper article and that was it. Do they want it to be a little bit sexier now? Do they want you out there with, do they want some video footage, some audio footage, all of that as part of that package?
I shot a video of a 6-year-old shearer the other day. I was quite proud of that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, news, it has changed, and I would like to think that I'm a little bit different to, the times have changed too, that since I've come along to my predecessors, probably haven't followed so much the traditional rural reporting. I've probably injected more people stories into it, and I think that is what people want to read about these days. It is about, everything's about people when you cut to the thrust, really. And I guess my coverage is largely, you know, let's talk about an issue. It could be quite a dry one. Let's find a person that's affected by this and tell that story through that way. So, yeah, things have changed. Certainly looking at putting things, and while we are traditional print, we are also looking at the various other platforms, whether that is, you know, video, whatever, using social media also to push that reach of stories out further and beyond the rural audience as well. But yeah, definitely changed.
And Sally, you've been doing this for a while. What attracted you to the agricultural sector, and what keeps you coming back day in, day out?
And I know it's probably a cliche, but I am genuinely passionate about the farming sector. I grew up on a farm. I still live on a farm. I love everything about farming, and I love the opportunity to be able to go to work and make a difference, hopefully, by telling the stories of the great stuff that is going on in the sector, and there is so much of that. So, I guess I've always, I've just always lived and breathed farming, really. That has been my life. And it is a genuine passion, and it is a privilege to tell the stories of those that are in the sector.
Tracy, it's interesting. Jamie mentioned, you know, they've got, you know, quite a large urban audience. Sally talked about, you know, bringing those stories to people. Who are you telling your stories to? Who are you speaking to? Are you speaking to an urban audience, or are you predominantly thinking, look, what we focus on is very much for a rural audience, and then urban people will find it fascinating as well?
That's exactly what it is. Yeah, we're basically focused to a rural audience, but, you know, people that live in the city, they care about the food they eat and the water they drink and the issues of, you know, sustainability and traceability and all those sorts of things. So even though we are targeting the communities, rural communities, people that work and live in rural communities, more and more there are people in the bigger cities that are actually watching the programs. I mean, we do a lot of stories about research and innovation and technology. People are interested in all of that kind of thing. Plus we do excellence and best practice, people that are at the top of their game, and also kind of consume type stories too, the paddock to plate.
Yeah.
So yeah, people generally are all interested, even though we are targeting the rural sector.
Marvellous. In a way, and Jamie, we've often spoken about that urban-rural divide. In many ways, each of your platforms is a way of just letting people in, really, to provide an insight into what is going on, and likewise to provide a platform for people in the industry to tell their stories.
Yeah, look, I think Tracy's medium television and country calendars are a perfect example of there is a real hunger out there for those rural stories, especially when they're well told. And I think post-COVID it's changed, or not post-COVID, we're not through it yet, but because of COVID things have changed as well. I think there's more interest in rural New Zealand. I think importantly there's more recognition that with tourism a goner for the next few years, that we are very dependent on the farmers of this nation to get us through what is going to be a very deep economic hole. And I think there's a renaissance or a resurgence of urban folk wanting to find out about what's happening on the farm. Our job is to convince them that we're not all dirty polluters or people who are growing trees never to chop them down, and if we chop them down, all the slash falls on Tolaga Bay. So it's very important that we tell the stories and certainly add a rural balance to sometimes urban media imbalance.
And
if
Sally,
that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And Sally, I mean, I guess there's a sort of you're there also, not only promoting agriculture, but also to make sure that when things don't go right, they are pointed out by someone who knows what they're talking about.
Of course, and that's, as much as I am always saying that, we are there to, I want to push out the positive stuff. But that doesn't mean to say that we're going to ignore an issue if it comes up, if it does portray farming in a negative way. But I would like to think that, certainly in our case, with my background and experience, that there is the knowledge there to know exactly what the story is. And I think, too, there's often, I get sick of people that have bandy around, the media, as if that all media in New Zealand is out to get farmers, and that is certainly not true. But I think sometimes we've got to remember that gone are the days where everybody, including most reporters, have got a connection to the farm. So often there is just this lack of understanding around basic farming practices that perhaps if somebody is being interviewed by an urban-based reporter, they actually need to take the time and not assume that they know what something is, whatever farming practice it is, and actually explain to them and why it is done.
And so crucial then, Tracy, in a way that we maintain separate bodies of people who know what it is, who have a deep knowledge of farming systems, ecosystems, the people and the personalities within it. How important is it now that we're seeing the fragmentation and the dissolution of a number of media? We were talking just before, the number of people we knew during the COVID lockdown who lost their jobs in the media industry. Yeah. So that government support, I mean, you're a government-funded program with a little bit of help from MPI and NZ On Air. The likes of Jamie and Sally, do you feel you're in a little bit of a better position because you've got that funding, or is it round to round?
Well, it is totally round to round. Every year we have to justify ourselves to them to try and get them to come back and back us again. But I guess, I mean, the thing about rural delivery, it might be a little bit different from print, for example, is that we try to only do positive type stories. I mean, we do a lot of stories on biosecurity, for example, where there are things that are happening in more informational type things. But yeah, it's hard out there, and the thing that I love is that rural delivery over the last 15 years has become kind of like a hub to tell the positive stories. We archive everything on our website so people can go in there, and if they're interested in bees or sheep milking or whatever it might be, they can search it up and find, 50 odd stories about it. Yeah. So I think the main thing from our point of view is just telling those positive stories, because there are stories that do come out that are not always positive. Yeah. And
so, Sally, you feel supported down there? You think that, obviously, by as we've mentioned earlier, the fact that you have so many rural readers, there will be always at the ODT for the foreseeable future someone with a dedicated dedicated rural beat?
Absolutely. I certainly hope so. And also, I do feel supported, and I'm lucky. I mean, this patch is, there's a lot of rural folk there, and I've lived amongst it for a long time, and I know a lot of people in that rural community. So, yes, certainly feel well supported, but it is something that Allied Press is. It's big on our rural coverage, and I think that's great.
Superb, all right. And Jamie, I imagine by the force of your relentless personality, you'll continue to keep rural issues at the forefront of the radio medium until eventually you succumb and the new Queen, Rowena, will take over.
Well, don't worry, she's trying to push me under the bus right as we speak, Radar. No, look, I'm going to turn this around on you. And I think you're doing an excellent job for the rural media. And I just look at the work that you do around the Young Farmer contest, and then the work you do around Fieldays. And you're the most high profile of the four of us in this panel discussion. So I think it's important that we get people like you, there you go, who have a good rural background, son of a former president of...
Look, I tell you what, Pauline was telling me to wrap this up, but I think we'll just keep going. Thank you, Jamie. Because it is important that people do, continue, as much as those negative stories are out there, to tell the sexy and the good stories, which in many ways is what Field Days epitomises. So all the very best, Jamie. We'll continue to listen to your broadcast, read your wonderful stories down there from the ODT, still sort of proudly independent in the South, as most of the South is. And of course, here's to all your success, Tracy, in the next round of funding for, how long, 15 years?
15 years, yeah.
Gosh, crikey. That's a career in the media, isn't it?
Yeah.
How long have you been there?
15.
Great.
A few before that, but
I might have to come and apply for a job once I've finished this, although my inability to read accurately from an auto cue may put you off. So thank you to Sally, thank you to Jamie, and thanks, as we said, to Tracy here in the studio.